ask you a question, in your opinion, because I asked this to a group of men the other week. How, and this is completely, I'd like to hear what you said, and then I'd like to get into some other things briefly. If you're a Catholic right now, let's just say you're, because we're both men, let's say you're a devout Catholic man. How are you supposed to vote right now, or how are you supposed to engage politically? What should you do? What do you think?
Yeah. And so, looking at that, obviously one of the most popular arguments, I think, is to say, well, the Democratic Party in the US, almost everyone, supports abortion, and abortion is the preeminent issue, and the bishops of the US say that. And it is, it's a very grave evil, right? Like strikes at the very heart of the family. And so, people say, well, because of that, you should vote Republican to prevent that evil. Then the other side of the coin is to say, well, that's one particular issue, and I'm speaking, from like a devout position. I'm not counting. There's people out there who just deny church teaching. I'm not speaking to that. I'm talking about like even like people who really care about it. Like I think that there are people who really care about church teaching that say yes, abortion is wrong, but you should vote for the Democrat because there's all these other issues. There's the environment, there's workers and just wages, there's immigrants, and there's poverty and all these other things. And the church has teachings about all those things. And the Democrats are closer to what the church teaches on those things, people would say. And so I think that, the way that I think about it is that, while there's merit to both those arguments, I can understand how someone would be in that headspace on either side. The ideas of both of the major parties in the US, Republican and Democrat, are so far from what the church actually teaches that, while they might signal that they're in favor of this issue or that issue, if you look at actually what happens, it's nowhere close to what the church is teaching. You look at abortion and the family and contraception and such, and it's not like the Republican Party has a long history of successfully fighting back against those issues. When Republicans are in power, the key thing is generally tax cuts and such. And then you look at on the Democratic side, they might talk about poverty and about the environment and about immigrants, but then you look at what actually happens. Sorry, there's some noise. You look at what actually happens, and the policies don't line up at all. I mean, the key things that generally get pushed through are, similarly, sort of welfare reform programs, and often a lot of, like sort of progressive anti-family gay marriage type stuff, right? So again, there's really Catholics, I think, should feel politically homeless in the US, at least when it comes to the major parties. Now, there's a third party called the American Solidarity Party, which I vote for. It's a third party, so obviously it's not going to be winning presidential elections. But I think one of the key things that the Catholic worker actually really points to in terms of politics is the need to kind of refocus our political vision. Like, we as Christians aren't really supposed to trust that, a pagan society, is going to, be the source of any kind of salvation or fruit. And, like you're mentioning that both parties are rooted in liberalism, right? In the classical liberalism of the founding fathers, right? Like the US is not a Catholic country. It's not grounded in those ideas or principles at all. And so, I'm not saying people shouldn't vote, and not even saying that there shouldn't be, political movements that Catholics get involved with, but that nothing really exists right now. I mean, the American Solidarity Party, again, is a small thing, but Catholic worker really wants to emphasize that we as Christians can be involved in social reconstruction, in political justice, beginning immediately. We don't need to wait for politicians to do things for us and stuff. Like, we can feed the poor, we can, clothe the naked and visit the sick and everything. And that, we really need to be living out, like, one of the problems that we have is that we think that, we can just kind of live our privately Christian lives and then, live basically like how everyone else does, be money seeking and be, selfish in how we spend and consume and be, sort of centered on our own status rather than on building up community and making sacrifices for our community, and then just vote the right way a few times a year and expect everything to work. That's not really the Christian vision. Like the Christian vision of how we should be living our lives requires everything. And I think that's a key thing that I think is really important about the Catholic worker is, there's a real need to act, now and to begin living out the gospel. And then hopefully, as more and more Christians come to do that, we can then begin to have some real change and success in terms of, say, ending abortion or ending, unjust wars or all of these other issues that never seem to get any better in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. There's a lot there. Quickly,
Yeah,
repeat. That was the, no, it's very good. What was the name of the party again? The American Solidarity
Party. Yeah.
Yeah, so as you were speaking, I was reminded of a few things. When we're talking about us and I agree with you. I agree with that sentiment that we feel like we're orphans.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm politically an orphan.
Mm-hmm.
On some things, I'm not going to get into the details, but I'm an extremist, depending on who you speak to, on both sides. Or you're speaking to a normie Republican or a normie Democrat, I'm an extremist this way or that way. And while you were speaking, I was reading this right before we began. This is from the Office of Readings from yesterday, St. Ignatius, his letter to the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
This one sentence, he says, for our Lord Jesus Christ, now that he has returned to his Father, has revealed himself more clearly. Our task is not one of producing persuasive propaganda. Christianity shows its greatness when it is hated by the world. And so to carry that on, we can't be concerned about making friends with political parties or cutting deals. And I think, and I have a few more questions. You spoke about the way we relate to families, the way we relate to the poor. Like we should have a preferential option for the poor, the way we should deal with those. One of the, as someone who speaks, or as a catechist, as a teacher, I speak to people about life issues, about abortion. One of the accusations that's often leveled is you only care about the baby as long as he or she's in the mother's womb. And then once they're born, you don't care about the poverty that they're born into. You don't care about feeding them, educating them. You don't care that they live in squalor or, pollution or whatever like that. So I think that touches, like you said, about and I think that's very important. We expect to vote maybe a couple times a year, or for some of us once every 4 years. Mm-hmm. We're voting for the good guy over the bad guy or whatever we think we're doing, and we expect there to be change. And really what we need to do is do what Christ said in the Gospel of Matthew. If you see someone naked, you clothe them. If you see someone hungry, you feed them. And we can do that now. We can live as Christ in the world now. So how important, and you've already touched upon this, so for those who aren't aware of the phrase, what we call in Catholic social teaching, we call subsidiarity. How important is subsidiarity, or acting as close to home as possible? Could you speak about that for a moment?
Yeah, and I think something important about subsidiarity is that kind of this, like the meaning of it can often be confused, because really the sort of meaning of it, I've heard a great phrase to express it as, as small as possible, as large as necessary, right? So subsidiarity is the principle that different spheres should take care of what is proper to them, what belongs to them, and so, sometimes it gets misinterpreted to mean like, oh, only the local stuff matters, bigger political issues doesn't matter. Like sometimes it almost becomes libertarian, where it's like, oh, like, yeah, the government basically shouldn't exist. Like everything should just be done, by individuals or something like that. But rather what it really means is that, there should be these many levels. You should have the society of the family, right? And then you should kind of have the, community or village that's around the family, and then the city, and then, the nation, and then the region, or even the world, right? Like all of those are levels of subsidiarity, and they all have different things that they, are involved with. So, when it comes to an issue like, climate change or something like that, that's a global phenomenon. That's something that has to be dealt with by, agreements and powers, on that higher level. But then, when it comes to things like, you know, taking care of those in need, right? Or even supplying for one's needs, right? This is a, great example of something in Catholic social teaching that, often like when the sort of left in the U.S., Democrats talk about like poverty relief. It's often in terms of like, well, the state should give you welfare and stuff. And state welfare is not a bad thing in all cases, right? In emergencies, it's necessary. The other thing about subsidiarity is that if one level fails, then a higher level should like step in to help it, right? But ideally, the subsistence of a family, the being able to feed itself, care for its children and its future, belongs to the level of the family, right? And so, rather than thinking that in an ideal society like the state, this is sort of the socialist vision, like the state takes care of everyone, and provides for everyone's needs. Rather, families should be able to actually own productive property. There should be more widespread ownership in society, and that's what part of what should allow for people to sustain their needs and such, people being paid a just wage and that kind of thing. So I think that's a key aspect of like, subsidiarity doesn't really fit into either visions of like, like both, capitalism, right, where you just have this giant world market, these giant mega corporations, right, that, privately owned by, somebody who owns billions and billions of dollars, right? Like that's not widespread ownership, right? It's not subsidiary. It doesn't have like the family as a real unit. And likewise, the sort of socialist vision where you have like the big socialist state that everyone works for and everyone is provided for. The same problem is there. You don't have subsidiary societies, and it's not just about like the family, existing at all. It's also about having other levels. Like think about, that nowadays the way that laws work, the way like zoning laws work in the U.S. You basically have no ability. Like you can't have, and you don't really have anymore local villages in the way that you used to, or local, cities that are able to kind of control their own affairs and have their own culture. Like everything becomes sort of mass produced. All of our culture is mass produced, all of our transportation, even like, instead of going down, to a local store and buying food in a sort of local market, you get it from Walmart, and, Walmart is shipping it in on giant freight trucks all around the country and from, ships all around the world. A focus on having these proper levels, the family, the village, the city, and not to say that you shouldn't have anything, that exists on the more national or even global level, but that they all need to be there. And I think that's like, I mean, it's complex, and I'm sure I could talk a lot more about it, but, diving into that kind of Catholic vision of subsidiarity and that rich social life that we're supposed to have that has really been destroyed by modern society by forces both in the left and the right, I think is something that is really missed by a lot of people trying to understand Catholic social teaching, because so often it does just get boiled down to thinking that we need to oppose abortion and gay marriage, or thinking that we need to care about the environment and the poor. But either way, it's always about the sort of national level doing these things. So that's kind of the political way of looking at it. There's also other aspects of just our responsibilities, like our need to act in that way, to begin, doing the things that a family or community or village should do. So hope that's a helpful brief summary.
Yeah, that's very good. I like the way you explain, because often when we hear subsidiarity, we just think like as local as possible, which can be the case. But you're talking about a well-ordered hierarchy of responsibility, and I like how you spoke about if one level fails, that there's the safeguard in place. So we avoid anarchy at one end, and we avoid whatever you want, global tyranny or globalization on the other end.
Yeah.
And you related that very good, because I lament that all the time. There's no villages. There's no the small town is dead. The village is dead. The village elders are dead. The just all of that. We are no longer connected to our food source, most of us, and we're no longer connected to each other. just a blasé gray of everything. Very
Hmm.
good. I think I'm gonna get you out here in a second. Sum up with a couple things that I was thinking about. So, in your opinion, we touched on this a little bit. Um, so I'll just throw a couple questions at you, and you tell me what you think.
Sure.
Doesn't have to be too in depth. Can a Catholic? I'm just going to spoke. Just we'll speak about Catholic. Can a Catholic be a socialist?
I'd say no. Just because, I mean, there's a lot of things in the social teaching that the popes talk about that, yeah, are, condemned of socialism. I mean, it's important to understand what socialism means, and that can get into a whole other conversation. But if we understood what it means in terms of what the popes are saying, then no.
Good. Okay. Good answer. Next question. Can a Catholic be a capitalist?
I'd say no to that as well. And same thing. It's all about like understanding what those words mean because they're so often thrown around incorrectly. But yeah.
Good. Well, that was very succinct. Very good. And when you're speaking, I'm reminded of I believe it was written by Paul the Sixth. I can't remember the name of the letter. He talks about the role of the government or the duty of the government, the state is for justice. The duty of the church is charity, but the prophetic calling of the church is a call to justice as well. To sum it up, we know, and this is turning a lot about politics, but this is very good and related. We know as Catholics, we don't truly, the Catholic vision is never truly a break between church and state,
Hmm.
separation of church and state in that way. Again, this is just a little bit of, because you've had a lot of good points. What do you think should be the organic relationship, or how should church and state relate to each other?
Yeah. So I think that's an important one because it's easy to misinterpret it. Now, ideally, and the popes have talked about this, that the state should ultimately be subordinate to the church, right? And but what that means has to be clear because some people interpret that and they think, oh, that means like theocracy or something, like the pope is like the ruler of the world or
Mhm.
something like that. Um, but what that means is that the church has a teaching, the church has divine revelation. It both interprets natural law and also the truths that Christ clarifies about what mercy and charity look like, right? And so the key thing there is that politics isn't a separate thing from religion, right? Like that's the sort of key idea of liberalism, right? And you hear this again on both sides. You'll hear Democrats, whenever you talk about, say, like, if you oppose abortion, if you oppose gay marriage, they would say like, oh, well, your religion has nothing to do with politics, right? Don't forget your religion in my politics or whatever. But then on the other side, you hear the exact same thing when you say like, oh, well, there should be regulations on the market, or we should make sure that people are paid just wages, or we should prevent the destruction of the environment. The reason we believe those things and have those as convictions are because of the church, right? Because the church teaches of our need to care for creation, our need to prevent theft, which is really what is happening with unjust wage, our need to care for the poor, the lowly, the sick, and so and on that side too, you'll hear people say like, oh, well, don't put your religious beliefs in economics. Your religious beliefs don't belong in the market or in economics. That's a science. Religion has its own sphere. And it's important to realize that religion is part of everything. Like God's truth extends to the whole world. He created every part of the universe. There's no part of the world that isn't subordinate to him. And so that, I think, is really the key idea, that we need to reject this liberal understanding, whether it's the sort of the liberal idea of the states that you see, especially in the left, or the sort of liberal idea of the economy or the market that you see on the right. Um, all of it belongs to God. Christ is king over all of it, and so all of it needs to listen to what the church has to say on these topics.
Good. Thank you very much. So what you're telling me is, as a human being, is not something to be divided up into a political animal or a religious animal. That
Can you hear me?
religion influences everything. And I've told students this recently: be careful when you hear politicians talking about uh, not freedom of religion, but they'll say you have freedom of worship. Um, because religion really touches all areas of life. Looks like we lost Sean. That is too bad. Let me see if I can. Sean, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, you said I'm frozen. It looked like you were frozen to me. So
I
let's
see.
hopefully that it turns out
Yeah.
we'll wrap it up there. This is a very good I know you have a lot more you could say. I have a lot more I could say about that. That's a very good overview in brief of what the Catholic worker movement is, a little bit about Catholics and politics. That's what I've been looking a lot into lately. How do we participate in the political realm? What is the role of a Christian in society? How do we look at the different political philosophies in light of the church's social teaching? Um, Good. Sean, I know you got to go. Anything else you want to add or?
Well, if I could maybe just
Yeah.
recommend, for anyone interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, there's so many good resources out there. And I just want to mention that a lot of the sort of mainstream resources about Catholic social teaching are often very watered down because of that issue that, we mentioned with the sort of right and left, that it's often kind of filtered through that lens. And so, some really great things. I mean, I write at Tradiste, so people can go check that out. It's a podcast blog. It has, various essays on it. There's a great resource. I'm friends with the guys over at New Polity. New Polity, they have their own podcast as well, and a lot of really great essays and articles that they publish a magazine as well. That's fantastic, and are really dedicated to just listening to what the church says and not falling into those sort of errors on either side. And then the other thing that in terms of the Catholic worker, whether someone wants to learn more about like the sort of political vision of the Catholic worker or just the life of it, I mean, there's Catholic worker houses all over, and people are certainly welcome to visit here or anywhere else. But the writings of Dorothy Day and Peter Marin are really great. You can find stuff on the Catholic Worker website, and Dorothy has all sorts of things that are written. But Peter Marin, there's a great collection that came out fairly recently called The Forgotten Radical Peter Marin, and it's just a collection of all of his easy essays. They're very readable, and that I would definitely recommend to people looking to understand the movement and the ideas of it more.
Thank you. And I'll put a link to it. So if anybody's watching this, Tradiste is Tradistae.
Yep, that's right.
Tradiste.com if they want to check that out. And good. So Sean Domencic, thank you very much for your time. And we'll wrap it up here. Let's say a glory be, and then we'll end the recording.
Sure.
Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri, Filio, et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio, et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us. Immaculate Heart of Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thank you very much, Sean.
Amen. Yeah, thank you.